Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Migration Summit. I'm really happy to have you here today. And I love when I introduce friends, so this is even more special for me. The Migration Summit 2023, organized by MIT React, NAML, the Quran Foundation, is a month-long convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced learners, universities, companies, social enterprises, policymakers, and governments around key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities. This year, we're exploring the theme of co-creating pathways to learning, livelihoods, and dignity. Welcome, everyone. And before I hand over to my friends and colleagues, I just want to talk about this song very quickly. Very special to us. It was written by one of our members of our organization committee and one of our refugee members, and also one of our MIT React and NAML alumni, who sort of shared her story, and Marie Kay, our organizing committee member, created the song from the lyrics. So this song is very special to us and unique to the summit. So I'm happy to have you here and to open the session with it. So I'm happy to hand over to Hugh, who is the founder and CEO of NIA. Over to you, Hugh, and welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Yeah, it's so great to see so many people on the call today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. We have an $11 trillion skills gap in the global market today, and I think there's about 500 million people around the world who are underutilized in that market, and 85 million people are displaced. So a large portion of that is refugees, who we'll be talking about today. So excited to look at how we close that opportunity gap for those minority groups to help close the global skills gap. And we're really lucky today to be joined by an amazing panel, who I'll introduce in a moment, who have very unique perspectives on this topic from different angles. So I'm sure we're going to see a really dynamic conversation. We'll probably have about a 30 to 35 minute Q&A with the panel just to hear their remarks on this topic, and then we'll open it up to a wider kind of Q&A, wider discussion towards the end of the call. And we'd love to keep the conversation going. These things don't get solved on one-off panels and Q&As, so we will be sharing a WhatsApp link at the end of the session, and also a link to NIA's community platform. So for those who don't know about NIA is an opportunity network. We're leveraging the use of AI and large language models to remove barriers to opportunity for underserved groups, and refugees was our sort of genesis with that. So we have a community platform we'd love to invite people to, but we'll also be launching a WhatsApp group, because we know people use WhatsApp group every day, all day. So that's in the interest of keeping the conversation going. So Banner will share that in the chat at the end of the session. Before we kick off, we just wanted to do a little pulse check on who we have today on the call. So I'm going to put a couple of questions in the chat. And you can just respond also in the chat. Just let us know what type of organization do you work for or represent, if at all, is the first question. And then the second question is your organization currently working with refugees? So go ahead and just respond to those in the chat and over the next minute or so, and we'll be good to see who we've got today on the call. Maria, advising a youth philanthropist interested in supporting Syrian refugees. Thanks so much, Maria. Thanks for joining. Lana at MIT React University. Amy, Code Division are a non-profit organization dedicated to tackling inequality via advanced digital skill courses. So it's an EdTech, it sounds like, or an educational talent accelerator. Currently working with Ukrainian refugees in Scotland. Amazing. Thanks, Amy. Mike is working with refugees in Africa. We've got Roshni working with a university doing research on refugees in India. Simon in Scotland, business sector, about to focus in this area. That sounds exciting, Simon. Thanks for joining. Krish, we're going to get to meet in a moment. Arena working with refugee communities in camps around the world, providing capacity building courses to protection professionals. Wow, that sounds fascinating. Sounds niche. Hope to hear more about that later. Rohan, working in the non-profit space in Asia with refugees. especially with children and adults in the education sector. Amazing. Great. Keep them coming. We're going to start the conversation, I think, but amazing. Great to get a taste of who we have on the call. It sounds like already we're seeing people from business sector, from the kind of NGO space, from the education space. It'd be great to know if we have anyone from the public sector as well on the call. Hopefully there'll be one or two. But let's kick off. I'd love to introduce this amazing panel. I'm going to start with Krish. Krish is someone that I've met over the last a year, 18 months, who works tirelessly. I don't think I know anyone who works as tirelessly as Krish around the topic of inclusion and integration for marginalised groups. So Krish, please, Dr. Krish, introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's a real privilege to be with you today, and lovely that we've got such an international audience. Super excited that MIT are helping to host this. When I was a young person, if ever there was a sci-fi movie and there was an alien invasion, it would be someone from MIT that would solve the problem. So I'm excited that we're bringing together the best minds and practitioners to figure out what we can do to best serve displaced people. Over 100 million people around the world for the first time in our history are now displaced either internally or across a border. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to work well together to find good solutions. My little charity, Sanctuary Foundation, has focused initially on integrating and welcoming people from Ukraine, but we're also very involved in helping Afghans who have come to the UK. We're a UK-based charity and catalytic in our vision to bring together business, academy, NGOs, government, and faith and community groups.
Amazing. Thanks, Krish. And Krish has worked he's worked with governments, he's worked with businesses, so has a really unique perspective on this, especially in the UK. Next up, we have Laura. Laura's from Lebanon, or she works in Lebanon. And Laura's someone who helped Naya get off the ground. Her web development company helped build our first website. So Laura, would love to give you the floor.
Yep. Hello. I am the founder and CEO of Concat. Concat is the first web development and design company that employs refugees and women from countries of conflict. We basically design and develop websites for international clients, from private sector to NGOs, all whilst providing, ideally trying to provide long-term sustainable employment to some of the world's most marginalised communities.
Amazing. Thanks, Laura. So if anyone here is looking to set up, Simon, for that new business you're starting, if you need a website, you know who to talk to. Thank you so much, Laura. Next up, we have Regina, who works at PwC. PwC has been one of the big kind of corporate responders, especially to the Ukraine scheme. And Regina works as a senior manager at PwC. So Regina, over to you.
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you all. So I work as a senior manager at PwC across our transformation business, and part of transformation also includes how we transform the way that we work and the people and the teams that we employ, which is why I'm so passionate about the topic of migration. Prior to PwC, I worked in the civil service, where we were also working to support refugees, those that are migrating to the UK, to get employed from a diversity inclusion lens. And I think in this country we have made a lot of progress with diversity inclusion, but it's not just about ethnicity, gender and disability. It's also to do with those that are displaced and making sure that there's a level playing field for all types of people from all types of journeys.
Brilliant. Thanks, Regina. And I think it's companies like PwC, the hiring demand that a lot of these big global corporates have, they really do hold a real key to this, to the answer in terms of economic inclusion. But it's important that the collaboration makes it easy for them to do so. Big businesses need simplicity, and I think that's something that hopefully we can talk about today. And then last but by no means least, Roy. Roy is someone who's from Lebanon, but isn't always based in Lebanon, who runs Jobs for Humanity, who help connect, help connect not just refugees, but other people from other underserved groups with job opportunities at amazing businesses all over the world. So Roy, over to you.
Thank you for the intro. This sums it up. I used to work in corporate world in the recruitment technology space, but then it was the explosion on August 4th, 2020 in Beirut that made me shift my focus and really dedicate myself to building a grassroots organization to bridge gaps in collaboration with Naya, called Jobs for Humanity. And I was raised by a refugee myself, a Palestinian refugee. So that's my nana. And been fully dedicated for the last 3 years to this mission, and I'm super happy to be on this panel.
Thanks, Roy. Awesome. Well, let's kick off. We've got a great group here. I think this conversation is going to be really interesting. I want to start, Krish, by coming to you with the first question, which is, I know that you said already you've had a window into the government side of things, the charity sector, the business sector. From your experience, what are the key ingredients in your mind that are needed for good collaboration in this space?
I think when we're trying to bring our best to help the people that need us the most, there are 3 ingredients that kind of stick in my mind. They all rhyme, just to help you. If someone wants to create another song like we had at the beginning, that would be fantastic. But my 3, dignity. This whole collaboration vision must be about restoring and recognizing dignity in the people we're seeking to serve. And that means treating people as people and not projects. And that means including those that we're seeking to serve in the design, co-design, in the implementation of what we're trying to do. Too often, particularly when you're dealing with governments and corporates in the academy, refugees or other vulnerable groups of people become kind of pawns in a bigger kind of field of play. But I think it must be informed by the people we're seeking to serve. That's the first one, dignity. Second one is agility. I got involved recently in the evacuation of Afghans to the United Kingdom. And I got a call really late on a Friday night, and the government realised that as the Allies withdrew from Kabul, the whole infrastructure was falling apart. And it became the kind of dominant news story just for a small window of time. But in that window of time, people were willing to help in a way they have never been before and haven't been since. So, for example, we were in 30 of the hotels, and rather than just dump stuff in the lobby as lots of people were doing, we went to spend time listening to people. What are the challenges that they got? What are the needs they had? Turns out most of the families were larger families, 2 adults and 6 children, and they didn't have effective means of clothing their kids because they just got on the back of an aeroplane with just what they could carry in their hands. They didn't have a way of leaving the hotel because they didn't have pushchairs and prams. So that's part of the co-design. What do you need? And then we set up an Amazon wish list, and 30,000 items were bought off of that wish list in a week. Now that happened because it was the news. It was all happening at that moment. Now, if I tried to set up that Amazon wish list now, as many of our Afghan friends in the UK have been there for nearly 2 years, there's so little interest. So you've got to capture the moment and act with agility. So dignity, agility. The third area I'd want to suggest is proximity. So we did a collaboration with a huge company called Salesforce. They're a software as a service company. Their women's group wanted to get involved in helping Ukraine. And so the key thing that we did was we set up a way for members of that women's group to meet with Ukrainian refugee women. And the way was just through a face-to-face workshop where we were doing, CV, evaluation and interview skills and maybe a bit of networking. It was a very small group of people. We just had 20 spaces. But in that afternoon, the Salesforce team connected in a really powerful way with Ukrainian women. And that allowed them to get rid of some of their prejudices and their stereotypes. And suddenly, again, it was 2 women meeting that had more in common than they had that separated them. That proximity brought empathy, and that empathy brought energy. So people then wanted to do, what else can we do? So we've ended up doing a lot of events with Salesforce, but it was that proximity that made the difference, that personal connection, not just sending stuff far away, but actually those personal connections. So those are my 3, I think: dignity, agility and proximity. I've seen those have a huge impact in the way that good collaboration works. Helps.
Love that. And I think the proximity piece, I mean, we've seen you mentioned as well that the individual being used as pawns in politics. I think a lot of the narrative is driven by the media, by politics, and actually that proximity is key to breaking down the stigmas, to breaking down those. I love that. And some of the other stuff that you mentioned there, the kind of design, co-design, agility, a lot of those, and actually the proximity, the empathy piece, are key ingredients in product design and technology. So I'm going to come to Laura, who runs a tech company. Laura, what's your perspective on this, especially from a technology angle? What are you seeing as, how can technology really unlock collaboration, in particular for migrants and refugees?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, from the client point of view, I think that proximity is exactly that. I think most of our clients have never, even if they work with refugees or kind of marginalized groups, they've never actually thought about working with refugee developers or refugee designers. And I think we've got like 60 clients, and maybe 20 of them now are looking at how they can employ refugees in a different capacity from working with us, which is such a hidden bonus, basically, of Concat, and something that's coming, part of a much bigger kind of impact piece. But I totally agree, like removing the stereotypes and the bias that exists, especially amongst refugee, the word refugee, right? It also comes, we work predominantly in the Middle East, but there's still a lot of stereotypes around the Middle East in general. And then refugee on top of that from the Middle East is like a whole nother thing. For us, we don't do the training. We just have partners on the ground in the Middle East that basically do the technical part, and then we upskill them in how to communicate with clients, that kind of stuff. For me, the biggest thing that I'm seeing within that is like the need for employers to basically report back the struggles or the challenges that they have to these training academies. In Lebanon, for example, where we operate from, we've just started for the first time like a tech group, and with all the NGOs and companies here, that there's kind of like 60 or 70 of us. And for the first time, we're feeding through the whole kind of pipeline, right? So from a kid, when they're 3, 4, whatever, once they start learning, and we've mapped out the route for each organization up to the stage of like 18, and then that's where they start looking at employment, right? This is not specific to refugees, but it's just an example of how creating kind of like, it's essentially a circular economy in a different context of really listening to each part of the journey. Like there's no point in me trying to employ developers from marginalized communities if they don't have the right skills. It's much more important that we feed back, like Concat's a very small example, feedback loop, exactly, Lorraine. But I think it's really important that corporates lead the way in this. And this is what you guys are doing at NIA, right? Like really feeding back into what the needs are in terms of technical skills, but also my big thing is communication. Like we really need to spread awareness of companies of how to kind of interact with refugees from anywhere in the world, and also how they then kind of fit into companies, not westernized colonialism. Digital colonialism is my new favorite word. Not in that sense, but just really educating both parties. And I think that's where a huge gap of collaboration still exists.
Amazing. I want to come back onto the feedback loop in a moment, and Regina, I'll come to that in a sec. But first, I want to just talk a bit more on proximity with Roy, because I think a lot of people in the school are already working with or researching in this space. But we'll have we're recording this will go out. For people who aren't working with refugees or don't even have proximity, and I think the Ukrainian response, certainly in the UK, saw people living alongside, actually welcoming refugees into their home at a large scale for the first time, certainly that I've seen in the UK. And that did so much to break down stigmas and stereotypes. But for people, perhaps, Roy, who haven't got the opportunity to share their home, or what other ways have you seen what other ways can people collaborate to get better proximity, to come alongside refugees, to walk in their shoes, to understand?
One of my colleagues has placed 800 refugees in jobs, in paying jobs. And then I asked him, what's your secret? He tells me, well, I go meet that employer. And then I ask to have a cup of coffee with him. And then I bring along 3 candidates. Now, let's say that employer works at IKEA, or this employer is a dentist. certifications of refugees aren't always recognized. Their language is a barrier because, they find themselves in a new country by force and not necessarily because that's the country where they had a network or they speak the language or they have different customs, different cultures. And so there is this lack of proximity and lack of mind agility in the mindset of employers that creates that barrier. And it's not just with refugees, it's everybody whose unemployment rate is higher than the average. If you're talking to a blind person, I tell you can hire a blind person today and they email you. Do you know if you can even email them back? Do you know if they can even do a design job? Do you know if they can even do a coding job? I tell you, you're going to hire someone who's incarcerated. Are you afraid that they may have done something bigger than what they may have actually done? Maybe they stole pot and they were in prison because of that. Or they've done their time in prison and they've learned so much. So there is this lack of understanding. So what can I do? Let's go back to, my colleague and bringing some refugees. So by the fact that having a cup of coffee with this employer and these individuals, the hire rate is over 40, 50%. Why? Because you've broken those stigmas, because you see that this person actually has removed 200 cavities, even though they went to a school and got their certification that you don't recognize because they were in Syria and, in France or Germany or the United States or Netherlands, it's different, or the UK, it's a different certification. Through NIA's community, I hope there's going to be coaching opportunities for anybody who wants to come in and say, hey, I'm going to come in and give a helping hand. We do that with Jobs for Humanity, pretty much doing similar things in sister organization and talking about, one thing that we could all do is, join force and collaborate, because then the impact is so much bigger and then the success stories will be so much bigger if they're additive. But one thing anyone can do is to say, hey, I'm happy to job coach a refugee, look at their resume, open up my network and help them, because their resume is going to look different. They haven't been as welcome especially by professionals who have access to, current jobs and who have a network. And so that could be something very simple that anybody can do.
Amazing. And actually I love as well, Krish, that the event that you mentioned with Salesforce and those kind of events, if you're working in an organization that are not yet hosting events in that space, we encourage you to do that. Reach out to pretty much anyone on this panel could probably connect you with communities that could come in, whether it's host a hackathon, host a discussion, just something that can break down those barriers to proximity. Because I do think it is, we started NIA, we started NIA with the belief that those stereotypes existed. And yet even having started it, we still discovered we still had biases, we still had stereotypes that needed to be broken down. This concept of digital colonialism is catching some interest as well in the chat. So we're going to come back to that in a moment. But feedback loops, we spoke there earlier about the importance of the business sector providing, not just helping provide opportunity and access, but then feedback. What are the learnings that they have from that? What's the wraparound support? I think one of the things that we found early on with NIA is that it's one thing to provide access to opportunity, but what's the type of wraparound support that's needed in the early phases for both employers and for employees to create good integration, to create good integration into different organizations. So Regina, I'd love to hear a little bit around kind of what you've been working on with PwC in that space and your perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of it is around having the right people in the right parts of your organization. And sometimes, even though PwC is, really big global business, sometimes it's actually our people that will lead initiatives. So, a lot of our people actually started off housing refugees in their own personal homes. And that actually helped us build up a great depth of understanding of how to integrate refugees into our organization, because they're building these family-based relationships with the types of refugees that we would also want to hire. And that really helped us land that messaging well when we did have the refugees in the office working on our projects, training and upskilling. And I think kind of that people-led feedback and direction can also be really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, I think from PwC's, your seat in PwC as well is much more holistic than refugees and diversity and inclusion. You're looking at lots of different groups. And there's a point here that Selen's point raised about the importance of having diverse hiring committees. I actually spent time yesterday with someone who was in the SAS, and he said that the recruitment strategy for the SAS is it's refer based. So you only get into the SAS if you're referred in by your peer group, because it's that kind of intense environment where the trust is so key. But I mean, trust is a key foundation in any organization. But the problem with peer referrals is that you just get the pipeline of talent just looks like the same people that are already there. What have you seen? What's kind of worked in that DEI space that and within hiring committees, within bringing in diversity into the actual hiring process that you've seen that could be really helpful in this kind of context?
So I think PwC is very similar. I think about 85% of our people are referred into the organisation. And work that I'm doing with leadership is actually how do you broaden your network so you can refer diverse individuals into the organisation at all levels. But I think one thing we do well is about having different landing points. So refugees also have ambitions. Not everybody wants to have a job. Some may have a business, some may have an idea and they're not sure quite how to land it. And we have different landing points. We have, for example, our social entrepreneurs community, which is where, we can have refugees say, look, I've actually got a business idea. I know this isn't my country, but through the social entrepreneurs network, they can get all the tools, the network, the support to start their own business with funding. We also have our social mobility group, which is actually where we deliver projects for social good in collaboration with experts, and that may be charities, but we can also have our refugees that say, look, I've been impacted by this. I want to work with your delivery PwC teams on making a solution that I've thought of a reality for your clients, especially in the public sector. If we have local government entities that are working in different parts of the country on refugee integration programs. So, and then we also then have the general recruitment process, which we try to bring in experts. So, for example, the Refugee Council to support us in that recruitment process. So I think it's about not pretending that we're the experts, but making sure we have the right people to support us in integrating refugees at different points based on their own career ambitions.
That's brilliant, and I love that you mentioned entrepreneurship, because I think the qualities needed in entrepreneurship are so often reflected in types of characters that you find in migrants, people who are willing to take risks, who have to solve problems, who are innovative and resourceful. And Roy, I saw you nodding away there. Did you have something to add in on that?
And I couldn't agree more with what you said, Regina. I was just absolutely nothing to add, but just in agreement.
I do have one more point to add, also around providing them with mentors and sponsors. So the same way that we would structure that support for people that are from the UK or the US, wherever your country is, because I think speaking to refugees more, I'm like, they always have their own ambitions, their own motivations. And, some refugees used to be doctors, some of them are even consultants. And I think it's about, within PwC, whilst we may mostly be consultants, we all have other jobs or other interests. We have doctors in the firm, we have pharmacists, we have people from the military. And how can we utilize the people that we have, with the experience that they have, to partner the refugees with mentors so that, okay, maybe they might need an initial job or initial project, but maybe they want to get back to their passion, get back to their career path, and providing that connection is really important as well.
Yeah, it's so good. Go on, Roy.
I do have a point that I'd like to make that I think could really help us solve things at scale. So a lot of employers like PwC operate globally, in 50 plus countries, and some of them 100 plus countries. And so when they want to go ahead and hire, they would rather not hire, have 200 or 300 partnerships, but instead have, a reliable source of talent, of upskilling, across. And one thing we could do as various community organizations, because so many of them us are connected, and Naya is really strong on the recruitment tech space. So to be able to utilize technology to connect is, what if a company comes to us, Jobs for Humanity, for example, and says, I'd like to hire a refugee in Sweden, or, someone from an underrepresented background. Look at our talent database, we'll find 3 candidates. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe they're not the right fit. Can we go ahead and tap into a button, access Naya's talent base? And when I say Naya, I mean, Naman and ProAbled and FE Factory in Lebanon, if we're talking about or Nawaya or any of these organizations, Talent Beyond Boundaries, and access that talent database and say, all right, cumulatively, these are the top 10 candidates. You're going to find someone here because this taps into 1 million people around the world. And there should be higher quality than you're probably going to find anywhere else, especially if you are prioritizing underrepresented talent. Second, how do you create an inclusive space? Because maybe the recruiters in Sweden haven't hired a refugee. I don't exactly know how to do that. Access to someone who's done that before, or coach, be it another employer who's volunteered to coach, or someone who's, from the space and has expertise, like, some of our colleagues. If we have a common database that is, very easily done today through technology, you don't even have an interface. You have to log into somewhere. You can just, tap, here's the job, source, these are the top 3 candidates, source Naya, source Namad. And then everyone can get proper attribution. And this could be a helpful solution to solve a global systemic issue with, a global systemic joint talent database.
Yeah, and I think that wraparound thing is key as well. That point around access to, we started to see it now that opportunity is more than just a job. Like it's how do you access those mentors and those coaches? How do you access training and development? I've just seen someone post and talk about getting certificates authorized, even things like that. What are the organizations that can help with that? How can you get financed if you're a social entrepreneur and you're a refugee? All this kind of stuff. And actually, one of the reasons that we launched the community platform, which is what Banu's shared earlier, is so that anyone on this group can just log in and immediately gain access to that community, that talent database, so to speak, but really gain access to not just to individuals, but also if you're an individual looking for opportunity, you can get access then to the partners that we work with and the kind of different services that they provide, so that you can access funding. So and I think technology has a big part to play in this. And coming back to that, and I want to hear more from Laura as well about this digital colonialism piece. How do we, Laura, what have you seen in that space? How do we avoid the ills of physical colonialism as it's been done previously? How do we avoid allowing that to start being embedded into the products we create, solutions we provide?
Yeah, so I think in what you guys are talking about, Roy, in terms of like connecting people through the different platforms is like an amazing solution to those refugees that have got their own rights in the first place, right? Like there's two kind of levels of that. There's the refugees that don't even have the right to work, like don't have bank accounts, access to finance is such a big issue in the UK, but also, within kind of host countries too. And I think there really needs to be a focus on getting the unregistered, kind of undocumented refugees onto such kind of platforms like Naya and Jobs for Humanity in the first place. Because, for example, the people that we employ at Concat, we had to be registered in the UK, right? Because we can't employ them. It took me like a year to try to get registered in Lebanon because of the situation here. So we had to register in England, which was the easiest option for me because obviously I'm a British citizen. So we now employ them as consultants, right? And then it's up to them to pay their own tax wherever they are in their own countries. And that's how it works for us. But it took us like a year to get to that phase because of the lack of knowledge and awareness around that. And it was like a full-time job for me to find the kind of best way for us to operate in the first place and that to be the solution. So I think there's a whole piece around businesses that also need to understand. We need to make it so much more accessible for businesses to understand how to employ these people in the first place. Because we can advocate all we want, right, for the talent amongst marginalized communities. But if they don't then know there needs to be like a place that they go for information that's readily accessible. So at the beginning, we didn't have any money, any funding. So getting legal advice was like a complete nightmare because it cost so much. And I think it's really trying to reach those people too, right? The ones that have come in, maybe not through a traditional route and are there, super talented. Most of them are desperate for work and desperate for integration within the communities. So there's also a lot of work around how to integrate refugees with host communities as well. And this is now what we're working on at Concat, like how having a Syrian maybe as a project manager working with Lebanese developers, for example, has never been done before, right? It's like the first time in history that it's ever been that way around. And there's a whole dynamic that comes within that. And it's really about focusing on not their nationality, whether they wear a hijab or not, it doesn't matter. Whether they're Muslim or Christian, whatever it is, it really doesn't matter. And that is what the tech sector is so good about. Like such a leader in refugee communities is because it doesn't matter what you look like, and it shouldn't matter, and it does still matter, but it really shouldn't. Sorry, tangent. Digital.
No, it's not at all a tangent. I think it's so relevant.
Yeah, digital colonialism was actually what I heard in a panel yesterday that I was on at the summit.
Right.
And I've been thinking about it all night. And then Lorraine said it was about how to make refugees be professional whilst not westernizing them, which actually is such a thing that I'm probably doing with my team at Concat, which is like trying to make them kind of fit to client expectations in Europe, right? Because time management is like such a different thing depending on where you are in the world. You know, in the Arab world, you can say something like, I'll do this tomorrow. And in Europe, it actually means that you want it tomorrow, right? In Lebanon, for example, it can be a little bit stretched sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And it's really
tomorrow, next year.
Exactly. But it's not about making them conform to like colonialism standards, right? It's just actually about teaching everyone, when you say that you're going to reply to an email, reply to that email, right? And that's just the basis of that, and how to write emails and how to structure them. And I'm kind of on an ongoing process within this in terms of Concat, but for us, it's really about educating our clients from the beginning. And we say always, we're in Lebanon. If the internet cuts, we're really sorry. My team are all on a journey of learning English. And if there's mistakes or things that are misunderstood, like please express them to us. And, we work together on this. And I think having that transparency from the beginning is really important, but not saying this is the right or wrong way, right? I think that's where the digital colonialism becomes an issue. When if I start saying to my team, this is how you speak, then it becomes a little bit more blurred, I think.
Yeah. So and I think that culture piece that we often hear this kind of feedback from employers saying, they wasn't quite, the cultural fit wasn't quite there. And we always change, is it your culture that's the problem rather than
that's what we need to ask back always.
Yeah. And I wonder how often that challenge is put forward, because it's a hard thing. How do you maintain a culture of high performance, but it's inclusive as well? That's not like our way is the only way and the highway, and if you don't fit with that, then. But actually, the different perspectives and ideas that you can get through hiring more diverse teams it can hugely drive performance. So yeah, Krish, I'd love to go back to you as well on that culture piece, because I know that you've worked with, you were talking about Salesforce earlier and Google. I know you've done some work with. What have you seen in that and the importance of culture in enabling collaboration?
I really love this challenge that Laura's wrestling with, that we want to be these bridge builders, but not impose on one group a kind of cultural norm. I think one of the reasons why, even in a musical like Hamilton, they say, if you want to get something done, ask an immigrant. That's because we're often good at living in two worlds. And that living in two worlds gives us a superpower. We can often spot things in another culture that other people can't see. But also we develop communication skills because we're always used to communicating between these two worlds. My mum was from India, my dad was from Malaysia, granddad from Sri Lanka. And I was growing up in a predominantly white area in the UK. So I was always trying to translate what my parents were telling me to what my mates at school were telling me. And that living in two cultures, many of us on this call have that experience. that feels like a burden, but actually it can be an incredible training ground for innovation, for entrepreneurship. And I think if we get this right, and it sounds like Laura's got the right angle here, that we're helping both clients and some of our workforce navigate those two worlds, we release a superpower. And I do think you're right about, it was demonstrated, I think it was a KPMG, or was it was one big group looked at the professional advantage, the financial advantage of diversity. I think it is because you're going to understand different worlds better. You're going to be more agile, more adaptive, more contextual. So I think this culture piece is really key. And for me, the dominant metaphor is hospitality. I want to be hospitable, and hospitable means I adapt my world in favor of the guest. So if you're coming to visit my home, I want to make my home work for you. And if that means I need to provide the right kind of food for you, that's my job, isn't it? Or if I need to make sure that, I adapt my structures so they work for you, that's my job. And so that's all about the power imbalance, that if you're in the host culture, you've got a lot of power, unseen power, privilege, some would say, and we need to take the effort in order to adapt, in order to accommodate the other. And so it's like that's what's going on in all these different scenarios that you
totally. It's that allyship as well, piece, isn't it? I had, when we started now, and we were in the kind of diversity inclusion space quite a lot, and as a white middle class man, I get a real imposter syndrome going into that area. But then you realise the importance of allyship, and like you say, having people from all angles working towards this common good. Conscious of the time, and want to open up a bit. I know Irina's got her hand up. I'd also love if we've obviously been talking about this topic from various different perspectives, but I don't think anyone on the panel, whilst people have experienced migration of different kinds, no one's actually been forcibly displaced. So I would love to know if there is anyone on the call who has that experience, who maybe wants to share a little bit of their views and opinions on this, then let us know in the chat. But I'm going to come to Irina. Do you want to come off mute, Irina, and fire away with your question or your comment?
Sure. Unless there are some people who have experience of displacement who want to speak up, I would let the floor to them first. Yes? No? I count to three.
We'll see. They can put it in the chat, and then I can come to them.
Yes.
After.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much for giving us also perspective, your perspective from the foundations and the private companies, and sharing with us your views. And it's very, very nice to see such a progress in the in the outlook of the private companies and foundation on the refugee protection and providing opportunities to refugees. And I was thinking in this context, when we talk about like complementary pathways and providing opportunities for refugees to move to the host countries, to the safe countries, we see that, there is a lot of development in terms of academia. There are specific programs that are made to help refugees to move to the countries, to the safe countries, and have an education. But the employment opportunity to get a job abroad is a little bit more limited in that sense. So when we usually talk as a private company, so when I hear private companies talking about hiring refugees, they're talking about hiring refugees who have an official status in the country already, which is quite understandable because, it's a less of a burden for private companies on to take, extra steps to make sure that the person is documented, that the person can move from one country to another. And it feels maybe only to me a little bit unfair that, we approach only this category of refugees, especially in the new trends in UK. I'm sorry, Krish. But yeah, there are a lot of people who are internally displaced, and they, wish to move forward, and they wish to get jobs, and they wish to live in a safe place. But then we kind of leave them behind in that sense. And I had a conversation with the representative of the private sector, and I will omit who exactly that was, and the person would ask, why would we bother? Because, we know that we can find the person here. Of course, obviously you can, but that's maybe, the question of partially of corporate responsibility. And it's, once again, it's a very complex thing to assist to sponsor a possibility for a person to obtain visa, to move to this country, to settle down in this country, then to get hired by this company. And that's maybe after I heard Laura speaking, there is a great opportunity, maybe, idea providing these consultancy contracts at first and not stop there, but by giving them simply consultancies, because she very correctly mentioned that, you can give them all the money in the world, but if the internet is not working, they will not be able to, answer your email or simply like working in the same way that the person with the high-speed Wi-Fi in UK or whatever country can be there. So, maybe using consultancy contracts to be a first step to allow the refugees to gain necessary funds to move to the countries, to the safe countries, and then look for opportunities for them to integrate them in the communities, to give them a job, etc., etc. So just wanted to share this thought and maybe hear if there are any extra efforts on your side.
I love, the consulting piece. I mean, Laura said as well about how that's how they had to get around certain things, and I think it's key. And actually, I think the pandemic was actually created opportunities, because the companies that provided remote HR and payroll benefit systems exploded through COVID, and so there are now a lot of organisations that people can look at to try. We work with a couple of Oyster HRs on Omnipresent to provide internally displaced people, or even just people at the risk of displacement for economic reasons, providing them with access to opportunities remotely. And there's like platforms like Upwork who have more flexible hiring contracts, but definitely an important space, I think. And there are, I think, as well, increasingly different kind of payment platforms, and you never quite know. I think one of the confusion pieces is people don't quite know what laws they need to stick to. I mean, certainly, if it's a big corporate, that there are going to be a lot of bureaucracy around whether, sort of PwC won't be just kind of being able to pick up contractors willy-nilly all around the world. Whereas the startup ecosystem, which, Silicon Valley in the UK and Europe, there's some startups who can raise a fair bit of money and have the funds to be able to hire, and are much more open to remote work. And I think that's something that we spoke about last year on the summit, is the importance of remote work in this space. So I'm glad you raised that. I don't know if anyone else on the panel had thoughts on it.
I think it's about trying to make it scalable. Like, within using companies like Oyster, right, is great, but they're expensive. Like, they take a lot. They also, I don't want to say this because I might be wrong, but I don't think they can hire refugees they can only hire refugees that are basically registered, right, and that have work permits. So still, there's this huge pool of people that can't basically get employment. And I think it's about bringing down the cost for hiring refugees through such platforms, because you can do it once you're at a certain level of a business, right? Like, for me, it's totally unfeasible to go through a company like that, a third party that would make my operations, 90% more efficient, but it's just the cost surrounding that. So I think until that becomes like more affordable, and I guess that will only happen as it becomes more scalable and more people use it, but still the cost surrounding that is just like as inaccessible. And
the other thing that was looked at, I think, last year was the opportunities in the kind of crypto payment, digital payments, e-wallets. I don't know if anyone on the call has had experience of that or has been looking into that space. I know that the crypto kind of area is probably still a few years away from maturing to the point that it's more feasible to pay people like that. But I wonder the kind of opportunities that might be available there. Something else that I did want to
talk about that, and then I won't speak. So crypto is amazing because of the fees, right? The fees are super low. We pay like 0.2%, whereas transferring to like Lebanon, Syria, I think I pay up to like 20% on some transfers. So crypto is definitely a thing, like an option. I just don't know how feasible it is, like business to business. I don't even know if it's legal from a UK business to pay an employee through crypto. I was kind of looking at that. I don't know if that is actually an option yet. So definitely in terms of the fees, it's a great solution. I'm not sure about the like laws around that yet. I know that business to business, I don't think you can do it, especially in the UK business.
I think the lack of awareness around it is part of the reason why organizations, or people can get away with that even if it's just a kind of one-to-one direct payment, because I think governments are slightly behind on knowing themselves what the legislation is. So I guess it presents a window of opportunity to push the narrative there, so that as legislation comes in, these kind of situations, these kind of contexts are being put forward as case studies for this. But definitely, I think definitely one that's probably still a couple of years from maturing. Something else I want to talk about as well was storytelling, and the importance of like representation. If you can't see it, you can't be it. How important, I'd love to hear, anyone can jump on this, I'd love to hear how important people think that is. Like, Krish, you're very good with videos and documenting. On anyone who follows, if you don't follow Krish on LinkedIn yet, I encourage you to. He's constantly providing amazing updates of the stuff that he's doing. But I feel like that some of that stuff that you do, Krish, it's so important, because when people see that, they believe it. It inspires faith and courage and optimism for people that are coming through that journey.
Yeah, I'm a real advocate for storytelling. Stories are a way that some people describe it as abductive reasoning, right? They borrow your imagination and take you on a journey, and it's through experiencing the world through someone else's story that empathy is built. So I think about this. Like I'm a foster parent. Sometimes we have foster children come at very short notice to live with us. One lad turned up, and he sat down at the dinner table. That was the first time he met the rest of our family. And I'd gone to prepare with my wife some food, and there's 8 of us sitting around, and we brought 24 sausages to put on the table. And before it even landed on the table, 20 of them landed on his plate. He'd just done this incredible karate move and took 20 out of the 24 sausages. And I was about to lose it and tell him how dare you treat my hospitality like this? What's going on with you? And someone taught me a skill. They said, look, be curious, not furious. Don't just react to the behavior. Try and figure out the story of what's going on behind the actions. And so I took a moment, and it turned out this lad had grabbed all the food because he'd lived in a place of food insecurity. No one had been looking after him. Every time he saw food, he needed to grab it. And he brought that behavior with him into my house. So making room for people to tell you their story will help build empathy and help you understand how to respond to them. And so I think we need to do 2 things. We need to make room for people to tell their stories. You blow up prejudice when people can explain why people are refugees. There's a narrative going around, someone mentioned it in the United Kingdom, that we're full, or that most people coming as asylum seekers are gaming the system. Those are false stories, and the only way you can counter false stories is by getting people to tell their true stories. But secondly, I think we need to make time to listen to other people's stories, because that will help us build empathy and respond appropriately. So, yeah, please, in the tech industry, the best storytellers are the best salespeople. Look at Steve Jobs. If anyone was good at telling a story, it was him. So I think there are skills out there on this call to make room for listening to stories and telling stories well.
And maybe that's just as we come into land a little bit. I think we're finished on the half hour. So maybe that's a great place for us to actually continue this conversation and take it forward. This was totally unscripted, by the way. But I think storytelling, I think there's 3 potential ways that anyone on the call can continue the conversation. We're going to share, I think Banu's shared the WhatsApp group link. Please join that. She's also shared a link to sign up to join the NIA's community platform, where we want to be driving some of this content, using those stories to change the conversation. There's also there's the Discord channel, I think, and from memory from last year, I've still got access to the 2022 one. So it's another channel that we could be using to continue the conversation. So if you haven't joined that yet, I'm sure Camilla can share that. Be curious, not furious. I love that, Mike. So let's keep the conversation going. These things don't get solved. It's so clear there's still a long way to go in terms of barriers to break down. But I think what we're seeing in some of the stories that come out of this, the encouragement, seeing more and more engagement from across sectors, the business sector, the government sector, charity sectors, institutions, education institutions, are starting to break out of silos. And I think technology has been a big theme here of technology can enable that and equip that. And so we're really excited to keep that going. There's a LinkedIn group as well. Fantastic. Thanks, Camilla. So yeah, please guys get involved, join the conversation. I hope to connect with you more. Let's look at setting up events off the back of this summit to keep that all going. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining. Thanks again to Lorraine and the team for hosting. Thanks to Banu from my team, who for this particular event has pulled all of this together tirelessly. Banu also designed the product, the NICE community platform. So she'll obviously be delighted to see you there. But all the best to everyone, and hope to see people again soon. And thanks, of course, to the panelists for giving their time and their wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for hosting, Hugh. Good job.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.